Hi there. My name is R.S.Belcher. I write primarily under the name R.S.Belcher, and I've been writing full-time for a living since 2012. And I have to admit, I've sat here and looked at this camera for a while, the same way you get the feeling when you're looking at like a blank screen and you're getting ready to write something. Have I actually got anything of any value to tell you? Or is this going to be one of those masturbatory YouTube channels where, the same kind of thing as like someone who sends you takes a picture of their lunch and sends it out to everybody. I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be of something of value to you, and I want it to be of value to me as well, because right now I'm talking in an empty room looking at a little tiny camera, and I'd much rather be talking to you. So I'm hoping that if you have not already clicked off of this, that we can have a dialogue here, have a conversation, and I want you to be a part of that. I write for a living, and I'm very proud, and occasionally, almost daily, I'm just a little amazed at all the nice comments I get back on social media from people that I don't know that well. I know them through social media, and they know me through my books, and that's a wonderful feeling. And I want to start out by saying, if you have read any of my stuff, thank you. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. If you haven't, this is an evil ploy to try to convince you to read some of my stuff, because I am a working writer. And like many folks who work for themselves, it is a occupation of feast or famine. And I want to tell you about the feast times. I want to tell you about the famine times. I just want to talk to you about what I do for a living, writing. And if you're watching this, or if you wandered across this, it's probably because you want to write too. Or maybe you already are writing. And I want to see if I can offer anything that might help you. So this first video is a little bit of a CV. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got into this business and where I'm at with it now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I want to do with this channel. And I guess I'll get started. First of all, apologize any technical issues. I'm a caveman, and I am trying to work in a medium that is somewhat semi-mystical to me, but I will improve with time, hopefully. And I also want to apologize if you hear a huge amount of ums and uhs. A few years ago, I got to be on Coast to Coast AM talking about trucker, basically trucker ghost stories, and promote one of my books while I was doing it. And oh, there it is. See? I remember I got one email from someone who was just like, I couldn't freaking stand it. I couldn't stand any more ums or uhs. And I used to do radio work. I was a DJ for many years. But when you're a DJ, you're talking for like 5 seconds, and you're going to intro that album, and here it is. Here's the new song we're talking about. And then you're off. In conversation, it does tend to kind of come out a bit more, especially when it's really, from my point of view, a one-sided conversation. You're hearing me, but I don't get to hear you say, stop doing that. But I will try to be mindful of it and see what I can do. I had started writing for pleasure when I was a kid. I was 9 years old. And in the summers, I would have to go with my mother to work. My father passed away when I was about 2 or 3 years old. And that's a story for another day. But I would go with her, and this is back in the 70s. She would buy me a pad of lined paper, and I would have pencils and pens, and I would sit in the back room. And my mom was a beautician. She owned her own beauty shop, and she took care of little blue-haired ladies for her whole life. And I would sit there in the back. There was a little oscillating fan. I can still remember it because it would get hot as hell. We're in the South in summer, and it would be pretty freaking miserable. But I would grab my pad of paper and my pencils, and my pens, and I'd draw, and I'd make up stories. I'd make up comic books, and I'd write the stories, and I'd draw the art for them. And I am not an artist. I probably my level of artistic ability is probably exactly the same as it was when I was 9 years old. So, you know, can't take that for what it is. So I would draw these comics. I'd come up with these stories, and they were characters that I loved, like Batman and Superman, and the Justice League, and the Avengers, and Spider-Man. And the stories, I would put them together, and I'd connect the pieces of paper through the little pre-punched holes. The top hole, I would run a bread tie, one of the little wire bread ties, and secure it together so the pages were all together in order. And I would sell them. I'd draw a cover page, and I'd sell them to the little blue-haired ladies for $0.25 a piece. And I have to say, I made up pretty damn well. So I've been a professional writer, getting paid for it since I was 9 years old. I do, one of the things that I do when I do talk to writers or students and folks like that, and I've been very fortunate to get a chance to do that over the years. And we'll talk about that some too down the road. But one of the things that I have wished fervently to do with this channel, and when I talk to people, is encourage them to pursue writing. If it's a passion for them, if it's something that burns in their belly, I really think you should try to do it. No one ever told me at 9 or at 13 or at 16, you could clean this story up and send it to someone and try to sell it. I wrote for pleasure, and I know it sounds ridiculous now, but it was a kind of a different world back then. One of the things I admire Stephen King greatly for a lot of things, but one of the things I do admire him for was that he began sending stories out when he was very young, when he was in his teens, and he learned from each story he sent out, learned from each rejection that he received. He put a nail up in the rafter where he and his brother shared in their house as a bedroom. And every time a rejection would come, he'd spike that rejection onto that nail, and the nails would fill up with rejections, and then he would add another nail, and there'd be more rejections, but each one taught him something. I came to this very late in life. When I was in my 30s, we were going to have our second child. This was my ex-wife, Donna, and myself. We hadn't divorced, obviously, at the time. But we were going to have a second child. I had been a business owner. I'd owned a couple of small businesses, and this was in the early 2000s, and it crashed and burned. It was right after 9/11, and we were going out of business, and I had to figure out, again, what I was going to do with my life, what I was going to have happen. And I came back to writing. I had always wanted to do it. And then in my 30s, it had come to me by that point, maybe I could do this for a living. Maybe someone would pay me to write for them. So I decided to pursue that. We moved back to my old hometown, which is Roanoke, Virginia. And I approached one of the community newspapers to let me write for them for free. I just wanted a byline. I wanted to get my name out there, collect some clips that I could use to show other publishers, look, I've done some work. I'm capable of doing it. Someone let me off the chain and let me write for them. And the person who first gave me the opportunity was a woman who is named Meg Hibbert. And Meg, if you do happen to see this, hi, I hope you're doing well. And thank you again for the 1000th time. Meg gave me a shot, and she put me through a little bit of boot camp. So some of what I want to talk about with this channel is not just my fiction writing. I am also still writing pieces for local magazines and hopefully newspapers. I just had an article published last month in the Roanoker magazine, which is a local publication. And it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing journalistic pieces. I've done some that were pretty heavy. I've done others that were pretty light, but it is another avenue. And I believe that journalism greatly helped me hone my skills to write fiction. I believe there is a great deal of value in pursuing journalism uh, as a boot camp for writing fiction. And we'll talk about that on another day. But for right now, I started writing for newspapers. Within a year, the publisher gave me the opportunity to manage a newspaper. I became the managing editor of a local weekly newspaper called the Vinton Messenger. And I got to do that for a couple years. That led to me doing work for a publisher who dealt primarily in Chamber of Commerce style magazines, and I got to do some of that stuff. And that was all exciting work, and it paid the bills. I was taking care of my wife and my children with my writing and nothing else. When I first started, when I went to the newspaper and began writing for them just for nothing, I was working 3 jobs. I worked at a 7-Eleven overnight in a place that they used to joke you should get combat pay. And I worked at a bookstore called Ram's Head Bookstore, which was, I don't think there are very many bookstores like that left. But that was a lot of fun. And between those 3 jobs, we got by. We made a living. Uh, we had a baby girl at that point, my daughter Emily, and we made it. And there is a pleasure in being able to do something that you enjoy and that you love and have it sustain you and sustain the people that you love. So all the time I was working for the newspaper, working as an editor, working as a reporter, I was also writing short stories, writing fiction, sending them out to magazines and publications. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the process in that down the road. But I decided to try a genre story. I had never really done a genre piece before, and I wrote science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Those are very much a part of my life, and they're kind of an anchor for me. I've written all kinds of stuff, but that's kind of like home. So Simon and Schuster had at the time a series that was an anthology series called Strange New Worlds, which gave relative amateurs, you couldn't have more than a couple of published sales, an opportunity to write in the Star Trek universe. So I wrote my first Star Trek story and sent it in. And this was around the time that my marriage was coming to an end, and was a little bit of a turbulent time. I'd moved into a place down the street from the house we had lived in, so I could stay close to my children. And the kids ended up staying with me a lot of the time. And one day I get a phone call and I found out that I had won the grand prize for my story for Strange New Worlds, and it was going to appear in Strange New Worlds #9. And I believe this was like 2006, 2007, somewhere around in there. And it was a very dreamlike moment. Just felt very unreal. I was so excited. Got to go and sign books, went to shore leave, got to meet a lot of the other authors from Strange New Worlds, and also from Simon & Schuster's Star Trek stable. Wonderful people. A lot of them are still good friends. So at that point, I started working on my first novel. I'd been kicking it around since before my family and I had moved back to Roanoke. When we lived in Richmond, I'd been kicking around this idea. And with what happened with Strange New Worlds, it kind of gave me some motivation to work on the novel, see what I could do with it. And I'll be honest, I didn't think anyone was going to buy it. I was writing a Western. I didn't realize there was a genre called Weird Western. I was writing a Western full of supernatural content and just bizarre people, bizarre happenings. Um, it was full of things that I loved and enjoyed. So I didn't know there was really a market for this. And some people write to market, and we'll talk about that too. Some folks try to like guess what the next big trend is going to be, and they try to ride that trend. And I've been told by many folks in the industry, and I've also been told by many writers, and it just and my own instincts tell me this as well. Write what you want to write, and the market will find you. If it's well written, if it's engaging, if it's original, then somebody's going to want it. So don't be trying to chase after, am I writing vampires? Am I writing zombies? What am I writing? You write what you want to write. You write the things that come out of you, because nobody else in the world is going to write that the same way you are. So I wrote my little Western, and I went to Dragon Con in Atlanta. I sat in on a panel with the folks from Tor, which is an imprint of Macmillan, Tor and Forge. And Macmillan is a big New York publisher, the largest publisher, I believe, still of science fiction and fantasy. And afterwards, they were, excuse me, they were promoting what they had coming out that year. So after it was over with, a lot of the junior editors who were kind of drafted into going to this thing, and I'm sure they had a good time. I imagine going to conventions and talking about books is a pretty exciting thing to do as part of your duties. I met a editor whose name was Stacy Hill, and Stacy was kind enough to give me a few moments of her time, and I gave her my pitch. And we'll talk some about pitching too. And I told her that I said I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, I do this stuff for a living, and I have written for Star Trek for Simon & Schuster, and I got an idea for a book, and it's this crazy Western. It's like if Zane Grey and H.P. Lovecraft had, gotten on a bender and decided to write a book. And from that, she said, "Well, we're looking for westerns." And I was like, "You're kidding me? Really? You're looking for west? Okay, all right. I will ride that down." Okay, so we exchanged emails, we exchanged cards over the course of the next 8-9 months, maybe a year. Bounce back and forth. Finally, she asked for 50 pages and a synopsis. I put those together, and here's a dirty little secret. I was working on this thing right up until the very last moment. I was still working on it. I was still writing it. It was a down and dirty first draft, but I sent him 50 pages, and I sent him the synopsis of where I wanted to go with this thing. And I didn't hear anything for a while. And there is one of the things that we're going to talk about this a lot, because we're going to need to talk about it a lot. This is a lonely job. You are sitting in a box, probably by yourself, inside your head a lot of the day. You don't always know if what you're writing will ever see the light of day. And that can be daunting, especially if you get those rejection letters, especially if you hear nothing. So there is a lot of aspects to this job that are not purely dollars and cents, technique, procedure. There's a lot of parts of this job that are psychological. Your mental health, your attitude, your perseverance, those things will play a role in what you do. And I think that doesn't get talked about. It gets talked about a lot with writers, between writers. And some conventions, they have had panels that I've had the honor to be on, talking about imposter syndrome and mental health and writing. And I think those are things that need to be addressed, because those things can sometimes hold you back from your potential. They can hold you back from fighting down the desire to quit, to just walk away. You have to be, I've told writers this many, many times, you have to be like Rocky. You have to take a hit and take a hit and take a hit and go down and get back up and be ready for some more. That's just the reality of it. And that is something you have to prepare yourself for as well. And you sometimes don't find out until you're in it whether you can do that or not. But I digress. I'm good at that. I'm going to wander off into all sorts of directions. So, sorry. Basically, the book, one day I was, at this point I owned a comic book and game store in Roanoke called Cosmic Castle. And one fine Saturday morning, I am opening up the store, and the Warhammer 40K guys are coming in, and folks are starting to kind of wander in, and I'm sitting there opening up the register and letting everybody in, and I check my email, and there's an email from a man named Greg Cox. Greg writes a lot of stuff. He is probably best known for his Star Trek novels, which he is still writing. And Greg is the greatest, one of the greatest editors I have ever worked with, if not the best. He's certainly in the top like 2. Greg sent me an email and basically said, hi, I read your story, read your book. I reread it again, and we want to make you an offer on it. And that was perhaps one of the most surreal moments of my life. I felt like I was walking in a dream. I don't mean to be melodramatic. I mean, that's just the truth. I wandered outside and I sat on the curb and I just tried to put my brain around it. It felt like my whole world changed, and it did. I was like winning the lottery. And I remember I had to go somewhere, and it was raining that day. And while I was in the rain, I was up the street from the store. I saw my ex-wife's car with my kids in it. And at a stoplight, I jumped out of the car and I ran up to them like a maniac in the rain, screaming, "They bought the book! They bought the book!" And the kids got out and hugged me, and it was just a great feeling. Again, it feels like I wait some days. Some days I honestly think I'm going to wake up and that was all just a dream. But here we are down the road. It was 2000. Let's see, that would have been probably 2010 or so. And I continued working on that novel. Greg and I basically did a year and a half worth of kind of tweaking. And interesting thing, I added a character during that time. I'll talk some about that too. Maud Stapleton, who is one of the characters in Six Gun Tarot and the rest of the Golgotha books. Maud was born. She went from being a kind of a secondary character to a major character during those rewrites. I'll talk to you about that some. And then the book released in early 2013. And my store went out of business about mid 2012. And I decided, instead of trying to, sort of half-ass it and do some other job and do the writing, I was going to burn my boat. They say the conquerors would come and put their boats on the beach and then set them on fire so they couldn't turn back. And I decided that's what I was going to do. So about mid 2012, I started writing full time and trying to make a living from that. And it has not always been easy. And it's not something I would recommend for everybody. Shit, sometimes I don't think I would recommend it for me. But I did it. And I have not looked back. So today, as of this recording, which is longer than I thought it was going to be, I'm going to try to wrap this up. I have 10 novels out. I have a novel coming out that just came out a few days ago that was originally, it was an Audible original audiobook that I wrote for them. It's now out as a full book, like an analog physical book called The Queen's Road. It's the first book in a space opera series that I have. And then next month, I have the fourth book in the Golgotha series, The Ghost Dance Judgment, which is my Western series, the Weird Westerns. I have that one coming out into July from Falstaff Publishing. I am at work on a standalone novel right now that I hope I'm going to wrap up in the next month or so. I've been saying that for several months now. I'm going to be a grandfather here pretty soon, next couple months. My daughter is having a baby. Very excited. A little girl. We're going to have a little girl. I'm very excited about that. And a little daunted. I mean, granddad, that's kind of it's a weird feeling, but, I'm excited. My son is 23 now and out on his own. My kids are both pretty much out on their own. And I'm still writing. And it can be a difficult life. There can be times when you are scraping change together to put gas in the car. There are times when you really question. You beat your head against the wall to put a book proposal together, and then the deal falls through. But then there are all the times I got to go to my kids' events and plays and recitals. I got to go on field trips. I got to be the only dad on the field trip. I'm going to get to be there with my daughter in the delivery room when she has her baby. There's a preciousness to this job. I've got to go and report and investigate stories. I've got to do things that have changed people's lives. And all of it's changed my life. And if we're here for a finite period of time and then we're gone, and maybe we are, I don't know. We can talk about that too if you want to, but what we do with the time we have here is precious. And I'm very grateful for having the opportunities I've had to do the things I've gotten to do. And I want to share all of that with you. And I want to learn about you. I want to hear what you want to do as a writer or as a reader. I want to hear about your desires to write. And if you are a writer, if you have that burning in you, you got to get it out. There are a lot of folks who spend their whole life, I think, frustrated that they never wrote that book or even that story. And everybody has a story to tell. Everybody. It's not some thing that's just anointed to certain people. Everyone can tell a story. The grammar and the spelling and the structure, all of that is things that can be corrected, that can be taught, that can be learned. But that story is intrinsic to you and only you. And I want to hear it. I want to learn about it. And I want to do everything I can to pass along. Every day in this job, I learn something new. And every day I usually learn I'm not doing something the right way. So I don't claim to be an expert on anything. I just have a great desire. It always makes me happy when I get to talk to people who are passionate and excited about writing. It gets me fired up about my writing. So I want that to be this to be a place like that. I want you to feel like we can talk about what you want to do as a writer. And maybe I can offer some help. I'd like to. So that's pretty much my CV. Next time, I'm going to start talking about a topic. If you have suggestions for topics, I would really appreciate you sending them to me. There's an email link down below. Please subscribe to the channel. Please click on the little bell so you get notifications when I put more stuff out. And I try not to be quite so long-winded next time. I was shooting for like 10 minutes, and looks like I'm going to hit around 30. So, blah, 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 blah. But thank you for your time, and I hope you'll come check back in. I hope you'll subscribe, and look forward to talking to you about writing and reading and everything else. So, Thank you so much, and take care. Talk to you soon.